Thank you very much, David. It's a real pleasure to be here. And to kind of David's point and a couple things that were said earlier this morning, I'm not a telecom guy. He said that this conference in the past had been sort of about the nuts and bolts of how you build networks, and that's something I know relatively little about, although I've learned a lot over the past year and a half. Another point Chris Mitchell made, he talked a little bit about community-owned networks, and he specifically mentioned sort of the Google model. And what Google's doing is pretty unique. If you could get Google to come to your market, there's a certain brand cachet that adds in terms of kind of how you develop community assets around that and how you make a successful network, I think. But there are a lot of things that you can do even without Google, and in reality even without the network. And so, the jury's still out to some degree on whether the kind of public-private partnership that Google and Kansas City has entered into. We've been about 4 months into hooking homes up, and as James pointed out, there's about 3,000 now. And so we're still in the infancy of what this network looks like. But what we were able to do, and what was sort of the advantage for us, not having to plan the network and not having to think about the technology, was that we got a whole bunch of community advocates involved from a very, very early standpoint to think about what all the consequences might be, knowing that the technology was coming and not having to worry too much about how to implement it. And that really started first from a true community point of view. I'm the president of the Social Media Club of Kansas City, which is a digital media, digital literacy advocacy group, as well as a professional organization. And our membership got very engaged very early on, trying to figure out what this opportunity meant. There were entrepreneurial organizations and other community organizations that started to do a lot of the early planning, because there was some expectation that Google would come to town not just with the network, but with a game plan. To say, okay, well, we're going to bring in the technology, and here's what you ought to do with it. But they didn't do that. There were two gentlemen eventually brought in by the city. One was the mayoral candidate in Kansas City, Missouri, who had lost to the current mayor, Sly James, just before the announcement, and the other, Ray Daniels, who was the former superintendent of the Kansas City, Kansas School District. And so these were two gentlemen very deeply invested in the community, not tech people at all. Didn't know the first thing about the technology of the fiber network, but they were tasked with starting to look at the community work that was already being done and to coordinate community work around putting together a playbook for what the city's and the community's response ought to be to this technology network. And Playing to Win in America's Digital Crossroads was the result of that. KC Digital Drive is the organization that I lead now and has been tasked with implementing this playbook. And you can look at that if you want. It's on kcdigitaldrive.org if you want to see what's in there. But the output is very entrepreneurial, as David said, very community-based, both in terms of how the ideas were generated and also how we are going about implementing them. And so our task as KC Digital Drive is to really build sort of the network that sits on top of the technology network that allows us as a community to be able to take advantage. And this is a process that you can do now. And one of the things that struck us, partly because it took so long for Google to say what they were doing after they announced they were coming. It was about a year and a half before they announced their product. We had a lot of time to think about that and say, you know what, all this planning work that we're doing and all these community conversations that are happening, it's great that Google made this announcement because now we're doing it, but we should have been doing it anyway. And so in terms of what you can do now, I think you can build the need for the network before thinking maybe about how to build the network itself, or at least have it happen at the same time. The mission, as I say, of KC Digital Drive is very much about implementation. We've got a strategic plan laid out, and to implement that, we're very much a civic startup. We have a little bit of seed capital from the cities, but we need to figure out how to create customers sort of around the initiatives that we're pursuing on this network. We need to connect initiatives, connect community organizations that are interested in building on this. And when I say building, I don't just mean building technology and applications, but building the sort of sociological framework that can really leverage this. And that was early on in the playbook, and that was one of the sort of the key takeaways, was that the work that we need to do is about 90% sociology and 10% technology. And that may even be a little bit low on the sociology side. So we've set out to create a framework that is very network driven. We're not about telling people what to do, but really about facilitating work within the community and helping to fill in gaps where things are needed so that we can take advantage of what we see as a really seminal opportunity. The strategies that we are pursuing, and these were four sort of distinct areas where we think there is opportunity. I think this is true for anyone that starts to get into this network building at this point. One was very much about ensuring equitable access and making sure that especially with Google being a private company, they didn't just go to places where there were wealthy citizens. We wanted to make sure we had an asset that was truly available to all the community. We wanted to drive innovation through demonstration, recognizing that there were going to need to be technological applications that were built on this, and that we had an opportunity to help develop what those were. To use this as an economic development tool and expand economic opportunities, again, across the socioeconomic spectrum, and also to establish leadership. Recognizing as you get into these network building activities that they haven't been done in a lot of places. So, give you a quick run through of kind of what we've seen and how that's worked out. Because even though we're only a few months into actually hooking homes up, we've seen a tremendous amount of progress and excitement. It's really sort of catalyzed the city in some amazing ways. First, in terms of making sure that we have equitable access. Google, I don't know how much you know about their rollout model. It was they divided the city up into neighborhoods and asked neighborhoods to express demand in order to figure out where they were going to bring service. And there hasn't been any place within the footprint of Kansas City, Missouri or Kansas City, Kansas that is ruled out from having access to gigabit service. So we're pretty excited about that. We were able to really rally community around this opportunity, even the poorer communities. We've been able to raise visibility of digital divide as an issue and as a social justice, as a civic issue, which 2 years ago it certainly was not. But now you get editorials, you get local news coverage and PBS and NPR coverage about what's the community doing to address issues of the digital divide and the digital inclusion. And we have actual tangible efforts that have started doing that. And so this is without respect to what Google's doing with fiber to the home and a network, we've got Connecting for Good, wiring up public housing projects with free Wi-Fi networks as a entry-level point to understand the value of internet access, where a lot of these communities, 20% that don't have internet access at all because they don't see the value. And we've been able to start having that conversation. We've been able to do this in a real regional way and bring organizations together that maybe hadn't talked together to develop a regional strategies for how we become digitally literate and what that means, not just in terms of turning on a computer and using applications, but in terms of better access to health care, in terms of education, in terms of job skills, and in terms of financial literacy. We've used a lot of these opportunities and a lot of this community work and the interest on behalf of the libraries and the healthcare institutions and the schools to say, okay, how do we build the gigabit applications on top of that? And so we have these social interest groups that we've been able to help initiate some pilot projects in. We have a digital media lab for youth. We have healthcare applications where we've brought really bandwidth using technology. What you see up there is sort of a cross between telepresence and green screen technology. Those two gentlemen aren't actually in the same room, in the same physical space, and we can broadcast this and have people interact in real time. We've got a teleradiology pilot that's happening between Safety Net Healthcare Clinic and one of the local hospitals. We are hooking up our various work groups that I'm sort of helping to manage with US Ignite to develop applications that really run on this next network. We have things happening within the government. We've had a joint application regionally for Code for America. We've issued an open data initiative. We've hired a chief innovation officer. Economic development has started to be more entrepreneurial in the way that it approaches economic development for the city and really supporting the startup culture rather than just going after big businesses. We built a proof of concept lab that just a couple days ago finished accepting applications for its first class. We have the Kansas City Startup Village, a completely entrepreneur-led, organically developed area in one of the first Google Fiber neighborhoods where one guy cashed in an IRA, bought a house, and offered to let entrepreneurs come and stay there for 3 months at a time rent-free so that they could build applications on this network. And we've done things with other cities around the world, including, started conversations like this. I've talked with Chattanooga and Lafayette at different places and talked to other cities around the world. Smart city planning was something that wasn't really on the radar in Kansas City. a couple years ago, but now it is. And we've also been able to bring visitors to Kansas City to help kind of see what we're doing. So it's been a whirlwind. I know that was a long and fast run through sort of a slice of what the activity has been on the ground. And there are a lot of things that we have taken away in that short time. And I think the first one, that I kind of started off with was that it's really the cultural and the social and the economic outcomes, not the technology, and you don't need the network in place to start focusing on those things. One of the tricky things is that new economy outcomes aren't really tied necessarily to the traditional metrics that people have used. So if you look at an economic development official who's counting W-2s to see how many jobs have been created, that doesn't necessarily line up with what entrepreneurs are doing in new business creation. So you need to think about the systems to measure your progress a little bit differently. We've needed to be very careful about balancing the organic activity and the entrepreneurial-led activity with sort of some central organization to make sure that things are connected. And that's one of the big challenges for KC Digital Drive is to operate in that way. We're in a unique situation on the state line, connecting two different cities across state lines, and networks that are regional really break down geopolitical boundaries in interesting ways, and so that provides a real opportunity. And I think the biggest takeaway for me, how do we do this stuff without having very much in the way of resources? And that's the idea that technology, a lot of times people talk about bandwidth and they talk about abundance of bandwidth, and that's what you really need. That's why you want to put in a gig network. And there's a lot of truth to that. But one thing technology does is it makes things easier and kind of increases productivity, is that it increases, makes an abundance of human capital. And that's what we have now in the city, and how you take advantage of that moving forward. To go back to what Darcy was saying about how do you take, how do you really drive that network power and use it on human scale is one of the really exciting things that we've got to develop and pioneer over the next 6 months as we see this network take off. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you.